I stopped dead in the doorway of our bedroom, still in my work boots, still smelling like a 12-hour shift on a job site, when my wife leaned up to kiss me and I said the words that made all the color drain out of her face. "You still have his cologne on your neck." She didn't move. She didn't breathe. She just stood there with her lips inches from mine and her eyes going wide and glassy the way a person looks when the ground drops out from under them. And I thought, after 6 weeks of watching her lie to my face, 6 weeks of swallowing it down and saying nothing, that moment would feel like something. Rage, maybe. Or relief. Instead, all I felt was a cold, quiet certainty. That the man I used to be, the one who bought her tulips on a Tuesday just because, the one who worked himself into the ground so she never had to worry, that man was already gone. My name is Daniel Reeves. I'm 44 years old. I'm a structural engineer at a mid-size firm in Denver, Colorado, which means I spend my days figuring out why things hold together and my nights, apparently, learning why they don't. My wife's name is Rachel. We met at 26 at a friend's barbecue, got married at 29, bought a house in Lakewood at 32. We have a son, Owen, who turned 10 in February and loves baseball and hates vegetables, and has his mother's dark hair and my terrible sense of direction. For a long time, I thought we had a good life. Not perfect, no honest person would call any marriage perfect, but solid. Built right. The kind of structure that's supposed to hold. The cracks started showing about a year ago, though I didn't recognize them for what they were at first. I travel for work. That's the nature of the job. 3, sometimes 4 days a week I'm on site somewhere in the state, and I come home exhausted, and Rachel is there holding down the house, managing Owen's school schedule, keeping everything running. I told myself she was tired. I told myself the distance between us was just logistics, just the friction of a busy life. She joined a new gym the previous spring. Some upscale place near her office with boutique fitness classes and personal trainers who charge by the hour. I'd signed off on the membership without a second thought. She seemed happier for a few weeks. More energized. She started going 4 mornings a week, then 5. She bought new workout clothes. She got her hair done differently. Little things. Things a man tells himself mean nothing. The late nights started in August. She works in marketing at a healthcare company downtown, and there are seasons where the workload spikes, product launches, campaign deadlines, so I didn't question the first few times she texted me at 7 to say she'd be late. Then 8. Then 9:30, home smelling faintly like she'd freshened up before walking through the door, a little too put together for someone who'd supposedly been grinding through spreadsheets. I asked about it once, gently, the way you do when you don't really want to know the answer. She said her team was under pressure, that her manager was a nightmare, that she was sorry she'd been so absent. She said it with such easy, practiced calm that I believed her. Or maybe I just wanted to. Owen needed us both. My job was already demanding enough. Sometimes you choose not to look at the thing that's staring at you, because looking means everything changes. Everything changed anyway. It was a Thursday in October. I'd gotten home earlier than expected, a site visit canceled, back by 4 instead of 7. The house was quiet. Owen was at baseball practice. Rachel wasn't home yet from work. I dropped my bag in the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat down at the desk in the corner of the living room where we both occasionally worked from home. My Apple Watch was syncing to the laptop. I'd forgotten I'd turned on the shared notifications to make it easier to answer calls on the computer when I was on long conference calls with my hands full of blueprints. I hadn't thought anything of it in months. A text notification popped up in the corner of the screen. It was from a contact saved under the name Trish Yoga. I almost ignored it. Then I read the preview line and my hand went still on the mouse. Last night was everything. Can't stop thinking about it. I sat there for a long moment. My brain ran through all the reasonable explanations. Trish from yoga could be a friend, could be a woman, could be talking about a class, a trip, anything. But something in my stomach had already started moving, the way it does when you're standing on a structure and you feel the faintest wrong vibration underfoot, the kind you can't hear, only feel, and your body knows before your mind does. I picked up my phone and found the contact. Trish Yoga. There was a photo attached to the contact. A man. Late 30s, broad shoulders, the kind of easy smile that belongs in a gym or on a billboard. The name in the contact details, the actual saved name before the nickname, was Marcus. I opened the thread. I read it in full, starting from the most recent message and scrolling back until I couldn't anymore. It went back to July. 3 months of messages, starting as flirty but explainable, then shifting, then explicit, then intimate in a way that made my throat close. He was her personal trainer. The one she'd told me about in passing, mentioned his name once, said he was really motivating. I'd nodded and gone back to my laptop. That was in April. By July, they were meeting outside the gym. By September, on the nights she'd been working late, she'd been with him. On Owen's birthday, when she'd told me she had to step out to take a work call and was gone for 20 minutes, she'd been texting him. On Owen's birthday, I'm not going to tell you I was calm. I'm not going to dress it up as some kind of controlled, cinematic reaction. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work my phone. I felt physically cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. I took screenshots of everything. I airdropped them to a folder on the laptop. I emailed the folder to my personal account, the one she didn't know about that I used for work-sensitive documents. I did all of it methodically, one step at a time, because I've learned that when a structure is compromised, you don't panic, you assess, you document, you figure out what you're dealing with before you decide how to respond. Then I went and sat on the back porch until my hands stopped shaking. When Rachel came home at 6:30, I was in the kitchen making pasta. Owen was at the table doing homework. She walked in, set her bag down, kissed Owen on the top of his head, and looked at me with a smile that I now understood was the practiced smile of someone who had learned to keep two separate lives from colliding. "Hey," she said. "You're home early." "Site got canceled," I said. She poured herself a glass of wine. She asked about my day. She sat at the table and helped Owen with his math worksheet. We ate dinner as a family. We watched TV. We put Owen to bed together, stood in his doorway for a moment the way parents do, and I looked at my son sleeping and I thought, this is the last ordinary night. Tomorrow everything is different. I didn't say anything that night. Not because I was afraid, because I was strategic. I had spent 14 years as an engineer. I know that when you find structural damage, you don't just start pulling things apart without a plan. You figure out the full scope of the problem first. You protect what can still be saved. The next morning, before she was awake, I transferred half of our joint savings into an individual account I'd opened at a different bank. Not to be vindictive, that money was half mine, earned on my hours and my back. I called a divorce attorney named Pryor, a woman a colleague had used 2 years earlier, and made an appointment for the following Monday. I took photos of all our financial documents, the mortgage, the retirement accounts, the insurance policies, and uploaded them to the same secure folder. I'm telling you this because I know what some people think when they hear a man sat on that information for 6 weeks. They think he was weak. They think he couldn't make up his mind. But I had a son to protect. I had a house in both our names, and a mortgage we were both on, and a business that traveled, and a life that would take more than a night of anger to unravel properly. The most important structures are the ones that come down in a controlled way, not in a collapse. Those 6 weeks were the strangest of my life. I went to work. I came home. I sat across from Rachel at dinner and watched her perform the role of wife and mother with a fluency that honestly turned my stomach more than the affair itself. She wasn't conflicted. She wasn't visibly guilty. She'd compartmentalized so completely that she could sit next to me on the couch and laugh at a TV show and then pick up her phone and smile at a text from him without the smile even changing. I watched Owen. I watched how she was with him, and I'll say this because it's true and I'm not interested in rewriting things to fit my anger. She was a good mother. Patient with his homework, present at his games, never let whatever was happening in her other life touch the way she showed up for him. That made it more complicated than I wanted it to be. But it didn't change what she'd done, or what I'd decided. I met with Pryor on Monday. She confirmed what I already suspected: Colorado is an equitable distribution state, and a long marriage with a child involved is always more complicated than either party wants it to be. The affair wasn't going to be some silver bullet in court, she told me. But it mattered for the negotiation. It mattered for how this conversation was going to go. I kept going to work. I kept coming home. I stopped touching her, started making excuses about being tired, being sore, needing sleep. She seemed more relieved than suspicious, which told me everything I needed to know about where her attention was. 3 weeks in, I overheard her on the phone in the backyard, voice low, laughing the way she used to laugh at things I said, And I stood at the kitchen window long enough to know the conversation wasn't about yoga. The night I said what I said started like 100 other nights. I'd been on a site in Colorado Springs all day. Got back to Denver around 8, pulled into the driveway behind her car. Owen was at a sleepover at his friend Carter's place. I remember thinking, on the drive home, that this was probably the night. The house would be quiet. There'd be no buffer. She heard me come in and called from upstairs that she was getting ready for bed. I washed up in the kitchen sink, stood there for a minute looking at the dishes in the drying rack, at the refrigerator covered in Owen's drawings and school photos, at the life we'd built in this house, and I felt the specific grief of someone who has already accepted a loss that the other person doesn't know is coming. I went upstairs. She was standing at the foot of the bed in her robe, hair down, reaching for the lamp. She turned and stepped toward me with her arms out like it was any other night, and I stood still and let her come close, and she tilted her face up toward mine. That's when I said it. You still have his cologne on your neck. The room went absolutely still. She pulled back and looked at me, and I watched her face move through 3 separate expressions in about 2 seconds. Confusion, then recognition, then a fear so sudden and complete it looked almost like pain. Her hands dropped to her sides. What? She started. I'm not doing this standing up, I said. Sit down. She sat on the edge of the bed. I pulled the chair from her vanity over and sat across from her. I took my phone out, opened the photo folder, and handed it to her. I watched her scroll through it. Her face went from white to a kind of gray I've never seen on a living person, and somewhere in the middle of it her eyes filled up, and her chin started trembling. How long have you known? She said, so quietly I almost didn't hear her. 6 weeks. She looked up at me. Why didn't you say something? Because I needed to know what I was dealing with, I said. Before I blew up both our lives without thinking it through. She started crying. The real kind, not the performative kind. These were genuinely involuntary, and I noticed a part of myself felt nothing watching them, which scared me a little. A year ago, those tears would have cut me in half. Daniel, she said. I'm so sorry. I don't know how this happened. I know how it happened, I said. He was there and I wasn't. It wasn't about that. I know that too, I said. But I'm not interested in the reasons right now. I've had 6 weeks to think about the reasons, and they don't change anything. She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her robe. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. I ended it, she said. A few weeks ago I ended it. That surprised me, though I didn't let it show. I hadn't known that from the text. The last few I'd seen were in mid-September, and it was now late October. Maybe she had ended it. Maybe that part was true. It doesn't matter, I said. It doesn't matter that I ended it? It doesn't change what you did, I said. Rachel, you were with him on Owen's birthday. You left our son's birthday dinner to go text your boyfriend in the parking lot of the restaurant. That's not a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. What you did was a decision. 100 separate decisions every single time, and you made every single one of them. She didn't say anything to that. There's nothing to say to it, really. I stood up and told her I was sleeping in the guest room. She grabbed my hand as I walked past and I stopped, and she looked up at me with an expression I'd spent 15 years loving, and I thought, this is how something ends. Not in an explosion, but in a very quiet room where 2 people finally tell each other the truth. I slept in the guest room for 3 weeks. She tried most of the things you'd expect. The tearful apologies, which were real and which I did believe, because I think she was genuinely sorry. The attempts at normalcy, making my favorite dinner, leaving coffee on my nightstand before I woke up, all the small domestic signals that say I'm still here, I still care, don't throw this away. I didn't eat the dinners. I poured out the coffee. She asked me one night, through the closed guest room door, what it would take. I sat there for a minute before I answered. There's nothing it would take, I said. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not even hurt the way I was. I just know this is done. What about Owen? She said. That's the only reason I'm still in this house, I told her. We're going to figure out how to do this well for him. That's not negotiable. I told Owen on a Saturday morning in November, while Rachel and I sat at the kitchen table with him between us, both of us working to keep our voices steady. We told him that we loved him more than anything, that this had nothing to do with him, that he would have both of us no matter what. He cried, and then he got very quiet the way he does when he's processing something too big for him. And then he asked if he could still play in his baseball league in spring, and we both said yes immediately, and some of the tension went out of his small shoulders. Kids locate themselves in the concrete. He needed to know his schedule, his team, his bedroom, that those things would still exist. I moved out in early December. Not to a friend's spare room. I'd done the math on that. I make a decent salary, and I wasn't going to spend the next chapter of my life sleeping on someone's pull-out couch. I rented a 2-bedroom apartment in Wheat Ridge, close enough to Owen's school that I could do morning drop-off on my custody days, far enough from the house that I wasn't driving past it every time I turned around. I paid first and last month's rent with the money I'd moved into my separate account. The same money I'd been paying into that joint account for 14 years while she put her paychecks into a savings account she referred to, without apparent irony, as her personal fund. I want to be clear about this because it matters. I had been covering 70% of our household expenses for the last 3 years. Not because she couldn't contribute more, she earns a good salary. But we'd fallen into a pattern where I paid the mortgage, the utilities, Owen's activities, the car insurance, the groceries, most of the home maintenance, and she paid her gym membership, her car payment, her own credit card, and kept the rest. I don't say this to be petty. I say this because when your wife is using your money to fund the lifestyle that gave her the time and energy to meet someone else, there's a particular flavor of insult on top of the betrayal that I don't think gets talked about enough. The apartment was nothing special, but it was mine. I bought a decent bed, a real couch, a dining table with 4 chairs, even though 2 of them would only ever be used when Owen was there. I hung a framed photo of the 2 of us at his last baseball game on the wall next to the front door, so it was the first thing I saw when I walked in and the first thing he saw when he came over. I got 2 plants. Both of them somehow survived the winter, which felt like a sign of something. The divorce proceedings took 4 months. Pryor was direct and efficient. The house would go on the market, proceeds split. My retirement account remained mine. Owen's custody would be shared. He'd be with me 3 days a week. With Rachel 4, and we'd swap on school breaks and holidays on a rotating schedule. Rachel's attorney pushed back on a few things. Mine pushed back harder. At one point she called me directly, bypassing both attorneys, and told me she thought we were making this harder than it needed to be. I am not the one who made this hard, I said, and ended the call. The papers were signed on a Thursday afternoon in March, in Pryor's conference room on the 14th floor of a building downtown where you could see the mountains on a clear day. I signed my name 4 times in 4 different places and shook Pryor's hand and rode the elevator down to the street and stood on the sidewalk in the cold air for a while. I didn't feel free exactly. I felt the way you feel at the end of a very long, very difficult project, emptied out, a little raw, but with a clarity underneath that hadn't been there before. I called Owen on the way to my car and asked if he wanted to grab burgers that night, just the 2 of us. He said yes before I'd even finished asking. He said he wanted the one with the fried egg on top. I said deal. Rebuilding is slower work than breaking down. I want to be honest about that because I think there's a version of this kind of story that skips past the middle, past the Tuesday evenings alone in a 2-bedroom apartment watching something on Netflix you barely register, past the moments when you're at the grocery store and you reach for something out of habit and then remember that there's no one to buy it for anymore. I won't skip past it. Those nights existed. They were real and they were hard, and I moved through them anyway. The same way you move through anything, you can't stop 1 day at a time, 1 hour sometimes. What helped was work. The firm landed a major contract in February, a 12-story mixed-use development in the Reno district, the kind of project that puts your name on something permanent in a city you actually live in. I threw myself into it with the focused energy of a man who has nowhere better to be and nothing to prove except to himself. My team noticed. My manager, a sharp woman named Fitzgerald who'd been in the industry 30 years, told me in a quarterly review that I was doing the best work of my tenure. I thanked her and went back to my blueprints. Owen was my anchor. Every Wednesday evening and every other weekend, this kid walked through my apartment door with his baseball bag over one shoulder and his backpack over the other and immediately started looking for something to eat, and I have never in my life been more grateful for the simple animal need of a growing boy to be fed. We cooked together. Badly. At first he burned the grilled cheese, I oversalted everything and then progressively better as we figured out that the two of us could follow a recipe if we both paid attention and neither of us got distracted arguing about baseball stats, which we always did. By May, we had a respectable taco night. By summer, we had a whole rotating menu. He asked me once, in the car on the way home from one of his games, if I was okay. 10 years old, sitting in the passenger seat with his cap pushed back on his head the way he does after a game, looking out the windshield like the question was addressed to the mountains on the horizon. I thought about it for a real minute before I answered. I didn't want to lie to him, and I didn't want to hand him something he wasn't ready to carry. I'm getting there, I said. It's a process. But yeah, I think I'm going to be okay. He nodded, still looking out the window. That's what I thought, he said, with the quiet authority of someone who has been paying closer attention than the adults around him realized. And then he turned up the radio and we drove the rest of the way home in a comfortable silence that felt, for the first time in a long time, like enough. I started dating again in July. Slowly, cautiously. A colleague set me up with a friend of hers. A landscape architect named Claire who was funny and direct and had been through her own version of the same earthquake 3 years earlier. We had dinner twice and discovered we had good conversation and no particular chemistry, parted on genuinely friendly terms, and I counted that as a success because at least I knew I could sit across a table from a woman and act like a normal human being. In August, at the housewarming party for a coworker's new place in Stapleton, I met a woman named Beth. She was a high school history teacher with paint on her shoes and an opinion about everything and the easiest laugh I'd heard in years. We talked on the back deck for 2 hours while the party happened around us. And at the end of the night, she handed me her number written on the back of a grocery receipt from her jacket pocket because neither of us had paper and she'd already had 2 glasses of wine and wasn't interested in the formality of a phone contact exchange, she said. I called her the following Wednesday. We went for coffee, then a walk along the reservoir, then dinner. I told her earlier than felt comfortable, on maybe our 3rd time out what had happened. Not all of it, but enough. She listened without interrupting, which is a skill not everyone has, and when I finished, she said, "That sounds like it was an awful year." And I said, "Yeah, it really was." And she said, "I'm glad you're on the other side of it." And that was it. No unsolicited advice, no comparison to her own stories, no performance of sympathy, just acknowledgement. I don't know why that hit me as hard as it did. Maybe because it's exactly what I'd needed someone to say for a long time. 6 months after the divorce, I stood in the lobby of Owen's school gym at his spring baseball banquet, watching my son receive a certificate for most improved player from his coach. This kid had worked so hard all season, extra practice, extra reps, dragging me out to the park on Sunday mornings to throw with him, and Rachel was standing 15 feet away talking to another parent, and we were in the same room and it was fine. Not easy, but fine. Civil. We both clapped for Owen. He looked between us with the careful attention of a child who's learned to read rooms, and then he grinned and held up his certificate, and the carefulness broke wide open into just a kid being proud of himself, and I thought, there it is. That's the thing worth protecting. On the drive home, Owen ate his dessert from the banquet, some kind of Rice Krispie treat situation in the shape of a baseball, and asked me if I was still going to come to his games next season. I told him I would be at every single one, home games, away games, the ones that were an hour's drive from Denver on a Tuesday night in April when it was still 40 degrees. He considered this seriously. Even the boring ones, he said. There are no boring ones. I told him. You're playing in them. He thought about this. Okay, he said. That's a good point. I'd heard through a mutual friend, around the same time, that Marcus the trainer and Rachel had tried to make something of what they'd started, and it hadn't lasted 6 months. She was living alone in the house now, waiting for it to sell, apparently dating someone new, someone she'd met through work this time. The news landed without much force. I'd spent so long thinking about what she'd done that I'd almost forgotten to think about what she'd lost, which was a choice she made, and she'd have to work that out herself. Beth and I are still together. We take it slow because we both know what it costs to build something carelessly, and neither of us is in a hurry to make the same mistakes twice. She came to Owen's last game of the season and brought snacks because she'd asked him what his favorites were, and he'd said those little pretzel bag things which are exactly what you'd expect a 10-year-old to request. She sat next to me in the bleachers and handed me a pretzel bag and watched Owen strike out looking on a curveball, and she said, "His form was really good though." And I said, Yeah, it really was. There's a building going up in the Reno district right now with my name on the engineering documentation, not literally, but in the way that matters in my field, in the seismic load calculations and the foundation specs and the structural integrity reports that will be on file somewhere for the life of that building. When it's done, it'll be there in the city I live in, holding itself up for the people inside it, doing exactly the job it was designed to do. I think about that sometimes. About what it means to build something correctly. About the difference between a structure that holds because it was designed to hold and one that holds because it hasn't been tested yet. When I was working on the foundation reports for that building, Fitzgerald came by my desk and looked over my shoulder at the load calculations and said, "You design like someone who's thought a lot about failure." I told her I'd had a useful year. She laughed like she understood what I meant without needing me to explain it. Trust is engineered, not assumed. That's the thing I know now that I didn't know before. It doesn't come with the marriage license or the joint account or the years of cohabitation. It's built by two people, deliberately, over time, from the ground up. And when one person starts undermining the foundation without the other knowing, it doesn't matter how beautiful the building looks from the outside. It will come down. The only question is whether you're still inside when it does. I got out. It cost me more than I can easily put a number on. It also gave me back something I didn't know. I'd lost a clear-eyed understanding of what I actually want, who I actually am, and what I'm willing to build from scratch. That's not nothing. That might, in the long view, be everything. If you're reading this in the wreckage of something similar, here's what I want you to know. The fact that it fell apart doesn't mean you built it wrong. Sometimes the other person is quietly pulling out the load-bearing beams while you're on the roof working. You didn't fail. You were failed. There is a difference, and it matters, and you're allowed to know it. It doesn't get better overnight. It gets better in small increments, in the form of a 10-year-old asking you to come to baseball, in the form of a woman handing you her number on a grocery receipt, in the form of the particular piece of a Wednesday evening in a 2-bedroom apartment that is entirely yours, with 2 plants on the windowsill and the mountains visible if you lean a little to the left, and your son's drawing taped to the refrigerator, and nothing in this quiet space but your own life waiting to be built again. That's where I am. It's a good place to be.